Tell me about the Trevor Project.
Oh, so the Trevor Project, for those who don't know, it's the largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention lifeline for LGBT and questioning young people. It's been around. It started 25 years ago, and it started because I was doing a solo show. It was called Word of Mouth, and I did it off Broadway in New York. And as part of that show, I was playing a whole bunch of different characters, and as I am known to do. And one of those characters was a story of basically my teenage self. I called myself Trevor, and I told the story of um, my attempt of suicide. And it was actually very funny and very poignant. It was called Trevor, and it was only 10 minutes long. It was only 10 minutes a part of a larger show. And Peggy Reisky, a director, producer, and Randy Stone, a producer, saw the show, and they asked me if I would adapt Trevor into a short film. So we made it into a 15-minute film.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't in the film. I didn't play my 13-year-old self, you'll be pleased to know.
No, I've seen it, but yeah.
And so that film, it won an Academy Award in 1995, and went on to when we put it on HBO, we thought it would be a good idea if there was a telephone number at the end of the film in case there were young people in their living rooms who saw the film and identified with the character of Trevor. And, you know, at the time, Ellen DeGeneres was hugely famous. She had just come out. And so she did a wraparound presentation for the film. So we knew it was going to be a big deal. And so we started the Trevor Project in 1998. And that first night when the film was on TV, we got over 1,500 telephone calls from young people around the country. And not all of them were queer and not all of them were suicidal, but it just was an indication of the need for it at a time when people weren't thinking about young people and their sexuality or their gender identification. I mean, gender wasn't even discussed. When we started the Trevor Project, it was for gay and lesbian young people, right? And then eventually the B was put on, and the T was put on, and the Q was put on. So back then, people didn't really talk about young people being gay or lesbian. They just assumed people went to college, and that's how it happened. Like you just came back from college and you were gay. Like they didn't understand, like, you know, my experience, which was that I knew I was gay since the time I can remember. I didn't have a name for it or a word for it back then, but I knew what I was. I knew I was different.
So that film is based completely on your experience.
Well, you know, it's a fictionalized version, but it's
Sure.
it's as close as I could come and still make it entertaining. I mean, you know, part of it was that I think what made it so acceptable at that time was that it was funny, and it was
Yes.
and touching at the same time, right? It wasn't depressing. It was actually saying, like, wait, what is this, and how can we make this not into a tragedy?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How can we make, queerness not be a death sentence? Because I wrote that piece during the AIDS epidemic, in New York City. I was living at the time, and everyone in my generation, not everyone, but many, many people were dying. And when I heard the news report about gay teen suicide, I just was like, this is insane. Like, here's this one generation that's dying and nobody seems to be caring about. And here's this other generation coming up who are taking their lives. And I just thought, this is crazy. This is crazy. Being gay is a wonderful thing. It's an amazing, amazing asset, not just to the gay people themselves, but to the society. That there's a group of people who are so determined to be their authentic selves is a help to everybody. I mean, anyone who wants to be their authentic selves.
In 1998, please correct me if I'm off, but that was also the year of Matthew Shepard, correct?
Yeah, it
So
was.
so did that play into the launch as well? Did you get phone calls of people who were very affected by that, or
I don't remember because I didn't have that much contact with the Lifeline at that time. I later became a Lifeline counselor myself for a number of years. And that's really what inspired me to go out and start the second organization that I started, which was called the Future Perfect Project. And the Future Perfect Project is really an organization that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of queer youth, the creative voices of queer youth around the country. So, whereas the Trevor Project is an organization that receives the voice of the young people who are out there, the Future Perfect Project is actually broadcasting their voices out into the world. Because I just started to notice that this generation of queer young people really had something to say
Mhm.
that had never been said before. They were just completely brand new iteration of gayness and queerness. And it was so exciting to see a generation come up who actually understood themselves and their history. Like they knew that people came before them who had fought for their right to be
Mm.
themselves, right? And they also had a sense of people who were coming after them, that they had a responsibility to the younger generation behind them. Um, they also had a social justice component I'd never seen in people so young. And they were just smart because they all had grown up with, this little phone in their hand and they
Yeah.
answered all their questions, right? Um, so it was such a huge shift after having worked with young people for 20 years to see this shift. I wanted to be able to do what I could to give them the opportunity to tell us what it's like to be them and tell us what they know and tell us what it's like to dare to be your authentic self in the face of no.
Well, and let me jump in here and feel free to add to this, but the Future Perfect project, y'all put out records. You have a record label component. You put out animated shorts that allows LGBTQ IA people to tell their stories. You have just general resources online, and of course you have that at the Trevor Project as well. And so you have a podcast. So you have all these creative outlets for young people, which I think is so incredibly essential for I mean, even just me personally. I mean, I'm not gay, but you know, I can tell you that a punk rock music scene kept me out of a lot of trouble when I
Yeah.
was younger.
Yeah.
I can
Look,
tell you that. I guarantee it kept me out of trouble. And honestly, well, there was some very negative things going on in that world as there can be anywhere. I also learned a lot of positive lessons about LGBTQ people. I learned a lot about acceptance because there were people in that scene.
mm,
And so for someone like me, it helped teach me what it meant and what it was and how to, try to be a good ally and a decent person. And it
and I
also
think
taught me a lot.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, to put a button on it, it also just taught me a lot about, just being yourself.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing that art really can do. I know for me, it saved my life. Had
Mhm.
I not met the world of theater when I was 15 years old, I wouldn't have made it through. I just wouldn't have. I found my people, I found my tribe, but most importantly, I found access to myself.